Welcome to Amherst, New Hampshire in the Colonel Robert Means house. Standing here today in front of what was once Jane Appleton's grandmother's home, we can reflect on a marriage that began with hope and personal struggle and ended in profound national and personal tragedy. It was here on November 19, 1834, that Franklin Pierce, a young lawyer with political ambitions, married Jane Means Appleton. Jane was a woman of quiet and introverted nature. She was known to be painfully thin and affected by physical and psychological ailments throughout her life. She detested politics and wished her husband would avoid public office. Her family, prominent in Amherst society and politically opposed to Pierce's Jacksonian Democratic views, also disapproved of their match. She was 28 years old when they married. Jane's aversion to politics deepened with personal loss. She was devoutly religious. She became convinced that God had taken her first two sons, a newborn, and later their 4-year-old son, Frank Robert, because of her husband's political ambitions. Following the death of Frank Robert from typhus, Jane strongly urged Pierce to resign his U.S. Senate seat, which he did in 1842. They enjoyed a happier period together, living quietly in Concord, New Hampshire, near the courthouse, delighting in their only surviving son named Benjamin, or Benny. However, that quiet life was shattered in 1852 when unexpectedly the Democratic Party nominated Franklin Pierce for president. Jane reportedly fainted upon hearing the news that her husband had been nominated. Their son Benny, just 11 years old, shared his mother's feelings, writing to her, "I hope he won't be elected, for I should not like to be in Washington, and I know you would not either." Pierce won the election, trying to reassure Jane that the office would secure Benny's future. But tragedy struck just weeks before the inauguration. On January 6, 1853, returning home from a holiday visit with family, their passenger car derailed just north of Andover, Massachusetts. The train car tumbled down an embankment. Miraculously, most survived, but their beloved Benny was killed almost instantly. He was found with his skull crushed. The Liberator newspaper reported, quote, "The cap that he had worn had fallen off, and it was filled with his blood and brains. This was a horrid sight that met the eyes of Mrs. Pierce when she regained consciousness." This was the third time the Pierces had buried a child. Franklin Pierce was terribly affected by the gruesome death of his last child. He was inaugurated president 7 weeks later. Jane, overcome with grief, did not attend the inauguration. She didn't accompany her husband to Washington at that time. She was so devastated that she couldn't even attend Benny's funeral. She did not join her husband in Washington for 18 days until after the inauguration. The traditional inauguration ball and many of the festivities were canceled out of respect for the family's sorrow. Once in the White House, Jane remained largely secluded for nearly 2 years. She spent her days writing mournful letters addressed to her dead son and became known as the Shadow of the White House. It wasn't until New Year's Day, 1855, that she descended the stairs to attend a public reception. A friend noted that her deep religious devotion and her struggle with social obligations of her role. She never fully recovered from her loss. President Pierce also suffered immensely. He turned increasingly to cope with his emotions, he returned increasingly to alcohol to cope with his emotional stress and nightmares. This affected his concentration and some say his ability to make decisions. Adding to his anguish, Jane continued to blame his political ambitions for Benny's death. Historians note, while Franklin Pierce's presidency is often criticized, it is certain that both he and Jane bore an immense burden of grief in the White House. Some believe perhaps that they were the most melancholy couple ever to live there. Their personal tragedies, especially the horrific loss of Benny just before taking office, cast a dark shadow over their time in the White House. And it offers a sympathetic, although probably not an excusing, explanation of President Pierce's and Jane Pierce's struggles in the White House. Standing here at the house, or in front of the house where their journey together began, we are reminded of the profound personal sorrow that lay behind the public life of President and Mrs. Franklin Pierce. The Colonel Robert Means house is here in Amherst, New Hampshire at 1 Pierce Lane. It is visible from the public street and just across from a lovely town green. It is a private residence though, and only visible from the street.